to get to know this God that is never frazzled, never afraid. He's never hurried, never worried. We'll probably never meet a person on earth that could be said of. But it can be said of God. He's never frazzled. He's never hurried. He's never worried. Never panicking. Never wondering. When the storm happened and the disciples were in the boat with Jesus because Jesus told them come, this was Jesus' journey. He invites them along. He tells them, we're going to leave here. We're going to go to there. So they get in the boat, they launch out, and they start to go from point A to point B. Well, during the journey, a storm came. Winds, waves. Imagine the condition, the emotional state of the disciples. Because we know it got to a point that they thought, we're going under. We're going to die. So imagine their emotional state as they're, using buckets or whatever they have, trying to maybe get some of the water out, trying to figure out ways to save their lives. Now, imagine them saying, wait a minute, where's Jesus? Somebody go find Jesus, tell Jesus, the state of things. And when they get Jesus, you know what was going on. Guys, he was asleep. It wasn't that he didn't know the current situation, the circumstances. It's just that this is the God that is never frazzled, never worried, never hurried. And he revealed himself to us and them as the God of peace. The peace speaker. He addressed this storm that was demonic because nature in that moment became possessed. I can say that because the scriptures tell us that he addressed the storm, the winds, the waves, and he rebuked it. And he released peace because it was in him. It was who he is. And what did Jesus say? Hush. Be still. Think of that. There are times when God needs to say that to us. And so that's where we get when we get in this place of prayer and meditation is we're just submitting and we're just subjecting ourselves to a nature that God lives in, an aspect of who God is. Our generation, our culture is ADD. It's attention deficit disorder. Our generation is wired that way. For years, we became more and more like that because we were trained by the television. And when the television came along, it was replacing the entertainment of radio, when families would sit around in the evening and listen to episodes and shows that were broadcast via radio. And then the radio began to be replaced by black and white televisions, and they would have a couple of channels. I don't know exactly how many channels they had, but then black and white televisions were replaced with the color televisions. And I remember when I was a boy, that was a big deal. It was such a big deal that hotels would have out on their marquee color TV. Like that's what's going to attract somebody to come and stay. Every room we have a color TV. Think of how time has progressed, and it has trained culture, us as individuals, because we watch, and it's now there's not just a few channels. Now we're not just hearing it, but we're seeing it, and now it's not even in black and white only, but it's in sometimes 3D, it's HD, high definition, it's so clear, and The shows are 30 minutes, maybe an hour. Movies are typically close to 2 hours or longer in some cases, but when they're longer, oh, it better be good, or we're going to talk about it. We're going to critique it just for its length. And in our shows, for years and years, generations, we experienced, I think, the impartation of this ADD, because they would go so many minutes and then they would stop and they would have advertisements. And what would people do back in the day? That would be a restroom break. It would be go get a soda, and it would be an opportunity. Our attention span was being formed. And we could have attention for so many minutes, and then we'd have to have a relief, and then we could lock back in. And now we have a generation that we don't just have 13, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13 channels. I remember when I was a boy, this is going to date me, it's going to age me, but I had to get up from wherever I was sitting and walk across the living room and click, 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 turn those channels. You remember that?
Yeah.
You're old.
You're old.
Yeah. So, but now we've got the remote control, and it doesn't just flip through, 13 channels now. It's so many channels. We've got streaming. We're not limited to just the cable. We've got all these different outputs, and so we can just flip, 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 flip. While we're watching stuff, many of us have been trained to watch something and at the same time look at the ticker going across the bottom of the screen. Like if you're watching ESPN or if you're watching the news, you could be listening and sort of watching the talking heads while at the same time reading about other stories that are coming across on the. It's just that our attention span there's so much. We can have PIP, picture in picture. We can watch multiple ball games at the same time, or shows. And so our attention has been formed by culture and by technology. So we're ADD, we're ADHD, which is, I'm convinced, what I was the majority of my life, attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And so this concept of people just knowing how to pray this way, it's understandable that we don't, Even in our church services, we know that we've got to keep things going. And, sometimes we miss events at church because, where were you at? I didn't know about it. Well, it was in the announcement. Well, who can stay engaged during announcements? That's like the commercial break. And who really pays attention during commercial breaks? We've been trained to kind of disengage. It's time for me to get my notes, my paper, my pen, or that's time for me to go to the restroom, or make sure my kids are acting right. And so, it's our attention span is in these commercials and the announcements, and so we miss things because we're ADD, we're ADHD. But the importance of this word peace, first of all, I said it's God, it's His nature. But it's an opportunity for us to become like that, for us to enter into that. Because that's what we need in the world today. It's the thing that's missing. We're not just missing out on this kind of prayer, but we're missing out on the attribute or the blessing that is there. And the blessing that is there is while we're frazzled and worried and hurried and trying to get boat, to not sink. We're trying to get the water away and trying to figure out, oh man, is there anything else I need to say or pray before I gulp down the water and lose my breath? We're nervous and we got ADD and we're running around. We can't sit still and pray because Shane's moving chairs around and straightening up flowers in the room. And, it's hard for us to slow down and just be. But the fruit of that is, if we can learn, is we inherit peace.